Recording.
Great. So we'll go through this time management one probably pretty quickly because it's a short set of slides. As always with these, we kind of like to go through why conversation matters. Basically, time management is a way of making sure you stay on schedule when trying to complete a project. If you don't have it, you'll typically find that you run out of time to be able to work on everything that you think you need in project. And it's pretty common that poor time management is the reason that projects fail. So making sure that you have good time management is always important. As we've looked at before, we've got our key project elements, that quick, fast, cheap triangle. No, not quick, fast, cheap. I said that wrong. Shoot, what's the first one? I'm blanking. Anyway, yeah, basically you've got your different project elements, time really being the one that we're focusing on here. And yeah, we'll just go on from that because my memory is blanking. So when it comes to creating and assigning tasks, basically you've got a few different things that you need to go through as you're trying to start your time management. One of the first ones is, how do you decide what needs to get done? Typically, when you start by looking at the requirements that you set forward for the project, that's a pretty good place to start. Looking at your requirements lets you know what things are important to the project, and they give you an idea of what needs to be done on the project to be able to achieve those requirements. Another thing is looking at some past projects that may be similar, maybe not exactly the same, but being able to say that you know what it takes to, say, design and build a wheel of one size. You can look at another size and say, well, I know that the one that was 3 times as large took me 3 hours. It may not exactly be that one that's 3 times as small will take 1 hour, but you at least know that it shouldn't take you much more than the time that you had on the last one. But we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. And then ask others who have done similar projects. So you may not have the same experience in trying to do some of these projects, like I was sort of implying with that last bullet point, but you'll find that pretty much everything that's out there has at least some similar thing that exists that someone has experience with. So being able to ask other people on that is a pretty good way to get started. Once you've figured out what tasks you need to do, you want to try to figure out who should do each task. Always, if you're trying to make a very efficient project and try to get things done as quick as possible, having the person on the team with the most experience in a specific task doing that task is pretty good. It allows you to get through it because they have a good amount of experience. They know almost exactly how long completing that task should take, and they should be able to get it done about as fast as you can because they have that experience with it. Sometimes though, people obviously want to try to learn things, and so being able to get that additional bit of knowledge typically takes longer. And so if you're trying to learn something new, it's nice to be able to pick up that task, but just expect as sort of the project manager that as you're going through, if someone who has no experience in it is trying to learn all the way through, it's going to take a little bit longer. And ideally, you'd have both people trying to work on the task. So again, it would still take a little bit longer than if people who were just completely experienced with it, because new members or new people on that kind of task are trying to still learn it. But being able to have both inexperienced and experienced people sort of get you the benefit of both So you're able to work on the project a little bit quicker, and those new people are able to actually gain that experience quite a bit quicker and a little bit better as well. Next, you want to try to figure out how long each of these tasks will take. And so, like I said, if you've done it before, you typically have a good idea of how long it should take. And if you haven't, try to find someone who has done it or something similar to it before and get an estimated time from them. And something that's probably worth mentioning in that one is you get an estimated time from someone who's experienced with it, and you're going to want to add a little bit of additional time to what they estimate. I think that's another slide in here that we talk about it, but in case we don't, I'll bring it up again right now. Basically, if I ask someone who's a professional welder, how long does it take to weld a specific object, and they say, oh, it takes me about an hour. It's not going to take you an hour if you've never welded before. It's going to take you quite a bit longer. And so actually being able to account for that is important. And I think that we have a little rule of thumb in a couple slides from now. If we don't, then I'll bring it up in a little bit. And another important thing is, if it doesn't seem like anyone's ever done a task like what you're trying to accomplish before, it's probably because it's a little too vague. Now, there's always the case that you find something that's so drastically different that no one's ever done it before. But what you will likely find is that you can break up a very vague or very obscure kind of different task into smaller tasks that are more common. So, for example, we could say a task is build a robot that's meant to explore the furthest reaches of space. And it's like, well, great, nothing has ever done that before. But we do know that there are robots that have gone and traveled long distances in space. We know that different things have been able to go out and explore some areas of space, and so we know what it took to be able to achieve those things. What if we break our task up into something a little bit more like what they did, and then add on to it to be able to end up actually designing what we need? Once you've basically got all of your tasks laid out and you know about how long they should take, you can start to form a critical path, which is a set of tasks that need to be completed in order to absolutely finish the project. And that critical path typically will tell you exactly how long your project will need to be. Obviously, if your critical path ends after the due date, you need to evaluate something within your project to be able to actually get it before your due date, so that way you can still have a successful project. And it will include all of your due dates throughout the project and all of the tasks that need to be completed before the next task can start. So when we get through here a little bit more, we will I'll show something, and I didn't realize there's a stray bullet point on this one. Yeah, so sorry, I'll go back to this and actually finish what I was going to say. So when you have that critical path, it will not necessarily include every single one of your tasks. And so when we get to it, I'll show a couple of different scheduling templates, and one of them will give a little bit of a better idea of what you can see with that critical path. Good things to try to think of when creating a schedule is try to add a little bit of buffer. So you will probably want to expect that if you think that if everything goes perfectly well, it'll take 2 weeks. You want to plan for a little bit more than that, because nothing will always go perfectly well. Things will always go wrong. Yeah. Then as well, and this was what I was sort of alluding to before, if you haven't done a task before, and someone gives you an idea of about how long they take to do it, if you multiply that time by about 3, that may give you a better idea of how long it might take you. Like I said, that additional buffer is really going to help, especially when you have no experience with it. If you have never done something before, you're gonna find that it takes you longer than someone who's done it a lot. And so asking them for help on figuring out that timing is certainly important because they know what will go into it, but you'll also find that they can still do it quicker than you. And so you want to take that number and kind of stretch it out a little bit just to make sure that you have enough time to complete it. Next, we'll actually look at some of the different documentation and methods that can be used for time management. One of the really important ones is a Gantt chart. Basically, it's a way of being able to display your entire project. It'll separate it out into your different tasks and includes all important deadlines. So on the chart that we have here, and I'm going to get the pointer up, you can see that we have a couple of these bright green starred points, and these are meant to be critical deadlines. And so when we said you have that critical path, you're basically relying on these to help you realize where that critical path goes. I will say that this template one here doesn't necessarily look great. There is a link within the presentation to another one if you would like to see it, and actually to, I think, this template as well. But yeah, you have these due dates that you know that each of those due dates needs to be complete before you can start working on the next due date. And so you can essentially draw a line that goes along these to be able to actually reach your critical path along your project, which will really help you figure out how long the entire project will take. And this one, you'll also see that we broke it down into the different phases of the systems engineering process, which we talked about in a previous lecture as well. And we also have spaces put in for breaks. Depending on how long your project is, you'll find that there will be times where little or no work is going to be done in certain time periods, whether it be like holidays or you know that within the place that you're working or with all the projects that you're doing, that if you're working on multiple projects, you see that there's a deadline, say around where this 4th week is for another project, you may push this project off sort of to the wayside for that week so you can focus really hard on completing your other project. And all of those different reasons to be able to have that break in there allows you to keep yourself in mind of how long this will really take you. I know that this sort of cuts out before it actually shows the end of this Gantt chart. Maybe I'll open this up at the end. But what you'll see as well is just that, actually, I think that might be a good thing to say as well. So you can also see with these phase sections that in this one, that was basically how it was broken up for being able to sort of pick that critical path. And like I said, it sort of cuts off the end, so you don't get to see it actually hit the ending of the project. but each of those phases basically start and end at each of your critical dates. And so it's nice to be able to break your project up that way if it makes sense. We're just going to go on to the next one. Next one here is a responsibility matrix, which basically takes those same tasks that you'd already looked at, and you decide to divvy up how those tasks are going to be split among different people. For example, in this one, we have different sub-teams, mechanical, hardware, and software, and then the leads of each of those sub-teams working on different things. You'll then also see that you have whether or not, or how primary they are to a specific task. So for example, with this first one of a project plan, it's mostly focused around the leads of the project, but other sub-teams also end up spending time trying to work on it, obviously because everyone needs to be involved in something like a plan at the beginning. But an example down here, like a detailed software summary, obviously the software team is going to be focusing primarily on that. And the hardware team will need to do a little bit as well because they have to integrate very directly with the software. And then the leads are trying to work on making sure that everything gets integrated as well. So those two groups are important in that, but you can see that the mechanical team isn't nearly as much because, well, mechanical and software are a little bit further separated apart, that it, at least in this example, didn't seem necessary to have the mechanical focusing much on that software development. I'm not going to get rid of that pointer. So a couple of different tools that can be used for trying to keep people on track. These are not the only things, and there are certainly some that may be better than others, but things like Trello or Google Calendar, just so you can, like with Google Calendar or any calendar, obviously you can schedule out when different due dates are and get them onto a calendar that everyone can look at. Trello, if you haven't used it before, basically you can put in a list of to-dos for each person or team that's within the Trello boards. That way you can make sure that you know what tasks need to be complete and you can check off whether you've done them or not. And one of the things that I like to do during meetings that is always good is basically start with a set of updates where you look at what the person said they were going to do in the previous meeting, what they ended up doing between the last meeting and this meeting, and what they're planning on doing between this meeting and the next meeting. And so being able to do that, similar to the Trello, allows you to hold this additional accountability, so that way everyone knows what needs to get done, what's gotten done, and who is trying to do it. And got a couple more slides here talking about dealing with schedule changes. So we're going to look back at our triangle and basically say, sometimes that schedules change, whether it be that due date gets pushed forward or some other event happens. Maybe you didn't account for a break that was supposed to occur and you're now behind a week, or you have to get everything done in a week earlier, can cause problems within your project. And so trying to be able to fix this, you want to ask first how it affects your critical path. If it drastically affects it, then you'll need to try to figure out what actions may need to be put forward. But if it doesn't really affect your critical path, it might be all right with just making sure that you stick to your critical path and try to just make sure that you get it done, but it may not necessarily be as detrimental. But again, sort of thinking about that triangle, you basically have two other things that you can do. Potentially reduce your scope. or potentially ask for more money. Obviously, each of those things help sort of counteract that loss that you get within your triangle. And another key one is, as long as you got that additional buffer space, you can try to utilize that and be able to use that to help sort of prevent yourself from getting too far off your critical path on your project. I think that is the last slide on there. So questions on anything or not? Thanks for listening.